Really, if you think about IT spend, every decade has been driven by one of the key C-level executives. The 80s was all about CFOs. The 90s, VPs of sales drove IT spend as companies were in growth mode. The 2000s were all about consolidation of IT spend and infrastructure, and CIOs really ruled the roost. This is the decade of the CMO. And because of this shift that's happening in terms of control of IT spend from other executives to CMOs, we believe this tectonic shift will drive a 10x increase in marketing technology-related spend. So before we dive into the details of these numbers, let's talk a little bit about what's driving this shift. What are the changes in consumer behavior that will drive this dramatic growth in technology spend? There's really 4 major changes. And I'll talk through each of these, and at some level, these are all things we all know. None of this is going to be a surprise to this group in particular. But I think what we all do is we underestimate the impact of these changes. And I'm going to use a story. It's, in fact, a story that David Jakubowski and Brian told me from their Facebook experience about chewing gum. Do folks in this room know that chewing gum sales last year fell more than 15%? For a category like gum, that's massive. So why do you think chewing gum sales fell 15% last year? Cell phones. What do you think people are doing? They're all sitting at a... Chewing gum is mostly sold in shopping aisles. You pick it up as you walk out. What do? Do you look at the aisle anymore? You're looking at your cell phone. So that's what's driven this dramatic drop in chewing gum sales. So if we now look around and think about other industries, think about how dramatic changes in consumer behavior are going to change industries which have been around for 100 years. I mean, gum sales have sort of grown at 1.5% for probably 40, 50 years. And today, they need to find a new marketing channel, a fundamentally different way to sell. So those, I think, are the changes that we all underestimate today. And so what I want to do is talk through each of these 4 shifts in buyer behavior for you. The first is really this shift from a few media voices to infinite media choices. When I was growing up, I watched television and maybe I listened to the radio, but that was pretty much it. Today, all of us watch video on YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, and a host of other channels. We get our news on Flipboard and Feedly and a variety of other sites, and we aggregate content from a host of different sources. This shift in how we consume media has dramatically shifted the way buyers and marketeers have to engage with us as individual consumers. The second shift is the shift that I call from dictation to conversation. I'll illustrate this with a story. 10, 15 years ago, if we had a problem with United Airlines or Best Buy or pick your favorite sort of large company, we would call their 1-800 number. We would complain maybe to the Small Business Bureau. Today, we don't do that. We go on Facebook, we post, we tweet, we start a blog. We really do create we have a different power in that conversation. And so the fundamental shift in the power relationship between consumers and brands is driving a very different behavior set amongst marketeers. The third major shift is the shift from being just right brain focused to left and right brain. Again, I'll take an example. For close to 75 years, Guinness Beer has sold beer on the promise it's good for you. So beer is good for you. I don't know how many people know, but in the last 10 years, Guinness has spent tens of millions of dollars trying to demonstrate through a variety of clinical studies and trials that beer does actually reduce heart rate, it reduces strokes. They tell me it reduces plaque. If I believed their advertising, I would stop taking my Lipitor pills and just drink more Guinness. Now, why do they do that? They do that because today, all of us as consumers, in our individual capacity as consumers, want to be satisfied not just in terms of our emotional needs, but also our informational needs. We need evidence of the brand promise to support the emotional appeal of the same promise. And that's a shift that's accelerating with the changes around us. The last of the 4 shifts is this notion of from one purchase funnel to infinite paths to purchase. When I bought my last car 10 years ago, I saw an ad on TV. I probably went to Craigslist or some other, or some newspaper ad, found a dealer, did a test drive, went through the process. I actually bought a car recently, and I didn't even go to a dealer. What did I do? I posted a question on Facebook. I posted a question in Quora. I looked at a couple of car-focused buying sites for reviews, and I eventually ended up buying it online even without a test drive. That shift has profound implications for Audi in this one example, but all marketeers in general. And so given these shifts that are underway, we believe that there's going to be a massive shift in spend from media and advertising to technology. As a result, we see this 10x in 10 years growth. What that means really is that over the next decade, marketeers will spend well over $100 billion, somewhere in the order of $120 billion every year on technology, which is, and when I say technology, I'm talking about software, not the media spend in online marketing, purely on software associated with marketing. What's going to drive this massive shift? Where is this money going to come from? Well, think about it. Marketeers, even today, in aggregate, spend close to $1 trillion on marketing. When you include all of media, labor, services of different kinds, today they spend over $1 trillion on marketing. Yet, they only spend 1 or 2% of that $1 trillion on technology today. We believe that number will grow to over 10%. And why is that? It's fundamentally being driven by two things. It's being driven by a shift in value from media, which is about context, to audiences and data. Again, let me take an example to describe this. If you're looking, traditionally, if you were looking to advertise to women in the 18 to 35-year-old demographic, you'd pick their favorite show, pick Desperate Housewives or some other show that you believe, it has mass appeal in that audience. You'd probably buy advertising on linear TV. You could probably get 20, 25 million women in that demographic. And you would pay through the nose for access to that privileged demographic. And in that context, the typical marketeer would spend between 1 and 2% of their overall media buy on technology. Well, today, if you wanted to reach exactly the same demographic, you can do it in a variety of different ways. You could buy media on Hulu. You could buy media in a variety of niche shows. You could buy, Facebook video. You could buy media in a variety of different contexts, and you could associate audience data with that media. And when you do that, you'd probably end up using some combination of TubeMogul and Freewheel and Facebook. And that combination together would capture 20 to 30% of the technology spend. This is an example for video alone, but the shift is profound, and it's happening across all forms of marketing. Value is being shifted from media and context to technology and audience data. The second thing that is happening is that software is automating a host of other things that human beings did. Roughly a third of all the spend, the $1 trillion that's spent today, is spent on people. The proverbial 22-year-old that's sitting in New York at an agency. They're all going to go away. Just they are. And all of that spend is going to get replaced by spend on software. So that's really the mega trend, the mega shift that we believe is the output of this decade of the CMO. Let me now talk about where this money will get spent. And as Meg tells me, behind every great marketeer is a great framework. And what I'm going to do now is go through the 5 keys framework at a very high level to lay out sort of where we think the opportunity is. The first of the 5 keys is what we call all hail King ROI. This is really the notion, the number one priority for all marketeers is the need to be able to quantify their marketing spend, to be able to model its business impact, and to be able to track how spending money at one end of the process actually drives business value at the other. But as we all know in this room, this is a very hard problem. For us as individually as consumers, we often see an ad on Facebook or on Yahoo or on a Google ad network. We then might go see a video on YouTube, and day after tomorrow we're going to get retargeted somewhere else. Finally, I may go end up buying the product in a physical store that has nothing to do with any of these individual experiences that we've had online. And yet, as a marketeer, I need to know how that ad that I saw, the 4 or 5 different ads that I saw across these different experiences, somehow connects to the purchase I made offline in a store. And so that's the problem marketeers are looking to solve, and that's the opportunity in terms of solving the ROI problem. The second major theme is around the notion of hiring mathmen, not madmen. And this is really the shift in buying media over drinks and over lunch to buying media programmatically. Today, roughly 5 or 10% of all media online is bought programmatically in value terms. That's going to change. I believe that by the end of this decade, all media, and that's digital, online, slice the data whichever way you want, all media will be bought programmatically. And the reason for that is that when you do that, marketeers can, A, combine Facebook with YouTube, with media that they're buying from some third source, and really look at it as a holistic purchase. People can track spend across all of these different channels, be able to shift spend from one channel to the other. Things that marketeers have wanted to do forever, but in the traditional offline world have never been possible. When I used to buy media years ago in an offline environment, and I would want to track performance, we'd bring in Accenture or Deloitte or some consulting firm to do this, post-purchase media mix optimization analysis. They would usually charge $1 million, so that spend had to be large enough to pay for the $1 million consulting study. It would take 6 months, and by the time I got the results, the study was a year old. Think about that in today's world. Media mix models have to change on a daily or weekly basis, and to do that, you really have to be able to buy all of your media programmatically. So this isn't a trend. This really is a takeover. But again, it comes with its challenges. Programmatic media buying today is perceived to lack transparency. Brands are very concerned, rightly so, about how their brand is positioned and what context it's perceived by consumers. So if you're Procter & Gamble, you don't really want your ad showing up somewhere next to a story about ISIS and someone's head being chopped off. That's just not the context you want to be seen in. And yet that's hard to do in many of the programmatic platforms today. But those challenges will get solved, are getting solved. And as those challenges get solved and brands are able to both get brand safety, have trust that their brands will be seen in the right context, and most importantly, be able to buy media across channels from a single console using software, and do that both in a spot market and a futures market, you will see this massive shift going. And as that shift happens again, you'll see this change in value from context to technology. The next major theme is this notion of publish or perish. Every marketeer, every brand is going to become a publisher. And in some ways, this isn't a new idea. 50, 60 years ago, when P&G started advertising in a big way, what did they do? They created soap operas. Well, it's come a full circle. Again, every brand today has to find ways to engage with their consumers at whatever point in the purchase funnel they are, in whatever context they choose to start their purchase decision process. And that may mean that they're on Facebook, that may mean they're on Twitter, that may mean they're watching the news somewhere, that may mean they're posting a question on Quora. And so brands and advertisers are increasingly having to say, how do I take what was a few hundred pieces of advertising and convert that into millions or at least hundreds of thousands of pieces of content, which I can then post in all the different contexts that my consumers want to engage with me. At some level, brands have started to do that. But when you start to do that, take Dove, a brand that is famous for its content marketing. How do they actually take hundreds of pieces of content and convert it into hundreds of thousands or millions of pieces? These then have to be posted and managed across a variety of channels. And when you post them and manage them across a variety of channels, you then have to do tracking and evaluation, going back to our ROI comment of ROI key a little earlier. This becomes a huge problem for most brands. They're not set up to be publishers. And so that is the opportunity for technology startups. How do you take a traditional marketeer, take a brand, and make them a publisher, not very different from Washington Post or the Yahoo homepage? The next major opportunity is really around the notion of mass personalization. Mass personalization isn't a new idea. We've seen movies. In Minority Report, Tom Cruise walked around, and as he would walk around, the ads would change around him. 15 years ago, Amazon sort of started lookalike modeling and started making recommendations based on what you bought. And that was a massive innovation at the time. I think today and over the next decade, all of us as consumers will expect and demand that our experience with every brand is uniquely tailored to the context that we're in. Whether you're on a website or you're in some other digital experience, and increasingly in an offline experience, consumers demand a personalized experience, and the technology today is now there. But it comes with its challenges. It's still very expensive. Very few people are able to do mass personalization at the scale that most B2C brands need to. It's also a huge data challenge and a challenge from a privacy standpoint. When retargeting first started to take off, it was kind of eerie. You know, you sort of went on a site and you saw a product, or you clicked on a product, and suddenly you started to see the same ad follow you everywhere. Today we take that for granted. It's par for the course. But as that personalization then starts to transcend every experience we have with a brand, every content experience we have, it is going to mean that brands and consumers have to find a new balance between what's okay and what's not. What kind of data is okay to share with that one brand, and what kind of data is okay to share more broadly. And so I do think there are huge challenges around data and privacy that have to be solved for mass personalization to take off. The last of the 5 themes is really this idea that marketeers will increasingly close the deal. In the traditional world, marketing has created leads. It's created awareness. Those leads, call them MQLs or pick your favorite term, have historically been closed by sales. And sales has really controlled most of the power in large organizations. I mean, in fact, if you take a company like Procter & Gamble, till a few years ago, in a marketing-oriented company like Procter & Gamble, the CMO of P&G did not even report to the CEO. He was one level down. So it was really sales leaders that ruled the roost. But that, I believe, is changing. And the best example of that is what we're seeing with freemium software, a business model that everyone in this room is well aware of. Think about the role that marketing plays in freemium software. Not only does it drive leads, but it drives customers of that product to really buy and start to use the product, not buy the product, use the product. And once customers start to use the product, you have sales as order takers that then call on those customers and convert them to paying customers. In the advertising world, Google actually did the same thing. The typical Google salesperson selling AdWords isn't really selling anything. He's an order taker. He or she is an order taker. The platform and marketing is selling the product. And exactly the same thing will begin to happen across a variety of product categories, not just in technology, but across the economy. And as that begins to happen, I believe that marketing will increasingly begin to close the deal, and the power balance between marketeers and sales and organizations will change dramatically. But in order to do that, again, marketeers have challenges around that are very similar to the challenges associated with personalization. This is a very large big data problem, but it's even more complex because if you try to close the deal as a marketeer, you're dealing with PII. In every instance, you need credit card information, you need individually identifiable information, and figuring out how this data is managed and figuring out the relationship and the trust that you can build with your customers so that customers allow marketing to close the deal is both a challenge for marketeers and an opportunity for technology companies. So those really are the 5 keys. And what I did over the last 10, 15 minutes is whiz through them really fast. I mean, I could pick any one of these 5 keys and probably spend the next hour talking about them. But that really isn't the goal today. We want to spend most of the time today digging into sort of the experiences that some of our other speakers have had around some of these topics. But I do want to sum up by saying that in this decade of the CMO, I think it's never been a better time to be a marketeer or a MarTech entrepreneur. If you're a marketeer, if you're a CMO, this is your opportunity to become a CEO. First, become a CEO in that you can become a chief experience officer, a chief digital officer. There's lots of evidence to show that CEOs are increasingly depending on their CMOs to lead the charge with digital initiatives. We see results, we see data from Spencer Stuart, we see data from Gartner, that more and more CEOs depend upon their CMOs to drive digital initiatives across the corporation. And that CMOs will be driving more technology spend and more technology-related initiatives than CIOs. So if you're a marketeer and you're a CMO, whether you're in tech or any other industry, this is your decade. This is the opportunity to become the chief experience officer and hopefully over time the chief executive officer in a company. And if you're a MarTech entrepreneur, well, there's $120 billion a year of spend to be had. I believe that each of these keys will create an opportunity for a Salesforce-sized company. So there's at least 5 to go around, if not more. Well, maybe Brett has taken one of those. But there's another 4 to go around. So there is if you're a MarTech entrepreneur and you have that dream to create a Salesforce-like opportunity, well, you know what to do. Dial 1-800-ASHU-GARG and just call me. Well, thank you very much.